We're going to continue our initial discussion in this introduction on this battle for the world's heart and soul, the conflict that exists between creationism and naturalism. All the major scientists before Hegel, this is George Wilhelm Hegel. He was a professor at the University of Berlin of Berlin in the early 1800s. He died in 1831. And since the ancient times, philosophers have assumed that the universe is controlled by certain invariant principles. System after system of philosophy was tried to formulate these principles, whether by mathematics like Euclid, alchemy, atomic theories like Lucretius, or astronomy, some in astrology even. Deities, they would try to explain things, or philosophical principles, to draw all these things together, but they assumed that the whole universe worked off of invariant principles. Modern science, beginning in the time of the Reformation, one, it demythologized nature. In other words, it removed God or gods from capriciously animating or controlling nature. That meant if the wind blew, it wasn't because of the wind god or because Jupiter had a bad day. You know, they demythologized. They said that God is not, the nature is not animated or controlled by gods or supernatural beings in their very essence. They also began to formulate physical laws based on absolute and invariant principles. They carried over the invariant principles, but they assumed that these are not due to capricious or arbitrary actions of invisible beings. Nearly all the modern scientists before Hegel were creationists who believed that the universe was created by God in a rational way according to invariant, absolute laws of nature. According to these creation scientists, since the creation, nature obeys these absolute, unchanging principles created by God, except by divine intervention such as miracles. All modern philosophers before Hegel, even the atheists who arose in the 1700s, that would be like Locke and Hume, always also assumed that the universe was controlled by absolute, rational principles. However, philosophically, there's a problem with this. The acceptance of absolutes assumes that a creator established the absolute principles in the universe. See, there's a contradiction in Hume and Locke, because if they're atheists and you're still working with this assumption, your basic assumption is that this thing was created and set in motion with these absolute principles by a creator. After Hegel, atheistic naturalism began to replace creationism. You remember before Hegel, they're all creationists, the scientists. Afterwards, this began to change. George Wilhelm Hegel in the early 1800s introduced his Hegelian triad. That's a thesis, antithesis, and then they come together to form a synthesis. As a constantly changing what they call dialectic, it means a flux. Everything's in flux. There's no such thing as absolutes anymore. Although Hegel believed in the absolute, and there's some question in his writings, even Bertrand Russell said Hegel's the hardest philosopher he ever read. It's what he meant by the absolutes is not really clear. Was it God or something else? He's not very clear. However, the Hegelian atheists, his students and colleagues after him, including Marx, dropped any absolutes and used Hegel's dialectic flux as a naturalism worldview with no God and no absolutes. Naturalism, by definition, is a mode of thought. It's religious, moral, philosophical, glorifying nature and excluding supernatural or spiritual elements. Naturalism is an atheistic Hegelianism. There are no absolutes and there's no God. For the modern Hegelians, all truth is relative, constantly changing. A thesis, antithesis, combined into a synthesis, which becomes the next thesis, which combines with its antithesis, and this goes on ad infinitum. Naturalists, and most of them, ironically, are from religious backgrounds. For instance, Hegel himself, Marx, Freud, Darwin, trained to be a minister of the gospel, Wellhausen, Dewey, etc. All these naturalists begin from religious backgrounds, but beginning in the mid-1800s, this is after Hegel, using Hegel's dialectic or flux, developed an atheistic worldview, dominating politics, economics, psychology, religion, social sciences, biology, and education. However, there's a need they had for a champion in the hard sciences, particularly physics. And the reason for this is hard science, especially physics, at the same time, this is in the mid-1800s, was solidifying the basic laws of science and the scientific method based on absolutes. Naturalism faced a formidable enemy to its dialectic world view of no absolutes in the hard sciences. The first and second laws of thermodynamics were developed by Lord Kelvin or consolidated by him. And the laws of electromagnetism were developed by Maxwell. They unified the laws of matter and energy interactions based on absolute principles. And all the universe is matter and energy. And they were consolidating these based on the fact that the universe works on absolutes. So Hegelian materialism had a very difficult time with these hard sciences. It faced another formidable enemy in the scientific method, which assumes the universe always acts on absolutes, even if the absolute principles of these interactions are unknown. The scientific method is, given the same conditions, you always get the same results. In every case, that's the way you get proofs. That's the experimental proof. Let me give you an example. Cold fusion is theoretically possible. You get more energy out than you got out into it. But experimentally, it's never been done. No one's ever gotten those results that some people claim that they got. So why? What happens is the theory is never established. And it's assumed in the scientific method that even if you don't understand what's taking place, given the same starting conditions, you always get the same results. The universe works on absolute principles. They needed one. Science is based on absolutes, and hard objectivity in the hands of creationists like Lord Kelvin posed a deadly threat to naturalism with its Hegelian dialectic. Albert Einstein, however, in the early 1900s, with his theories of relativity, that's about the macrocosm of the universe, and quantum physics of the Copenhagen school, that's the microcosm. This is Niels Bohr and Heisenberg and them, supplied naturalism with its Hegelian champions in the hard sciences. Why? Because they did away with absolutes. What did Einstein do? He erased the line between what? Matter and energy equals mc squared. You can change matter to energy and back again. With his warp space and general relativity, what? He erased the line between what? Time and space. So now everything depends upon what? Me. I move over here and the universe changes. Me. The speed of light's always constant with respect to me. It wasn't just a case of relativity or quantum physics, it's a relativism. There are no absolutes anymore. You erased them. So modern physics, and I would include in that Einstein relativity and quantum physics, and the Darwinian evolution supplied naturalism, it's Hegelian relativism, not relativity. That has to do with relative frames of reference. Relativism is frames of reference. It's me. Everything is related to me. Relativism. For its Hegelian, for the origins both of the universe and of life without God. That's what they were looking for, and that's what they needed. Atheistic naturalism at this point, begins to displace biblical creationism in science in the modern culture worldview. As Mike's mentioned before, presently, and I'm going to use these two terms interchangeably, modern culture and naturalism, because naturalism has succeeded in capturing our culture as a complete worldview, including the scientific realm. After Hegel, it begins to replace creationism, atheistic naturalism, replace creationism in our modern culture. Naturalists, using Hegel's dialectic, with Einstein's relativity, begin its conquest of modern culture with its atheistic naturalism, and it began to dominate everything: politics, economics, psychology, religion, social sciences, biology, education, and now the hard sciences. Modern culture is now based on atheistic naturalism rather than biblical creationism as its worldview in all phases of human life. You come down then, what is the basis of creation? It's the Bible. So you end up with the Bible versus modern culture. It's a battle for the world's culture and mind. Modern culture promotes its atheistic naturalism with one premise only. There is no experimental proof for the supernatural. And that is a correct statement. There's no experiment to prove the existence of angels, of God, of heaven, or hell. We're going to see later in this series why that's a false assumption to lead to that conclusion. Because you know what you do in science? What do you experiment with? Matter and energy. What if something's not made out of matter and energy? What if you can't test for it? The classic statement with the student that was nailed to the back of his chair by a professor. Well, do you believe in God? He said, the professor, do you have a proof for him? Have you tasted him? Have you touched him? Have you felt him? You know what the student's reply ultimately was? To the class, he says, does the professor have a brain? Has anyone ever seen it? Has anyone touched it? Is there any experiment for his brain? How do we know that any of these professors up here have brains and just have had brain surgery to see it? There's this basic assumption, even in the world of materialism, of matter and energy. How do you know that the earth has something in the center of it? Or how do we know that the sun isn't just a big shell that's hot? We haven't ever experimented with that. That's even in this realm. But we're going to see from the laws of science as we get into this, there is no explanation for, as Micah said, matter and energy, or the laws of science. This is in the realm of science. This system fails and will fail tragically, as you see later. Modern culture attacks the Bible because there is no experimental proofs for the supernaturalism such as God, angels, heaven, or hell. Modern culture seeks to explain all physical phenomena of matter and energy, and that's the totality of the universe, with atheistic and naturalistic causes.